everybody, and thanks for joining us on another episode of The BAM with Lori and Jenny. Today, we have another amazing guest on our show, Rachel Hagen. And Rachel is not only a badass mom, she's an entrepreneur. She's a dear friend of mine, and we're really excited to have her on the show today to talk about her journey in entrepreneurship, which led her to her current now, which is the head of Noted and Company, and she's going to tell you all about that. We're really looking forward to chatting with you today, Rachel. Thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so let's kick things off. I always like to get our guests telling a little bit about their background and kind of like setting the stage for what you're currently doing. But let's go ahead and start back, before kids. Rachel, you have two kids. Your son, same age as my kiddo. He's 8, and then you have another son, Eli. How old is he?
11.
11. Okay. So before kiddos, kind of what you were doing and how that's kind of led you to your current now in your company.
Yeah, I mean, as you might be able to tell from the gray in my hair, we could go way, way back. My degree's in journalism, and I landed in nonprofit event planning, which is a whole story in and of itself. But from nonprofit event planning, I started a event planning company in 2008, as I was saying. Quit my job and thought this was going to be such a great idea. And of course, I had to get really scrappy because it was not the time to be starting a new company. Planned some things with some nonprofits and sort of fell my way into wedding planning, which it's funny, whenever I say that I was a wedding planner, people immediately say like, oh, the number of bridezillas you must have dealt with. And I didn't. I really didn't. I loved what I was doing. I had a great time. I had long-term relationships with clients. I would go through the entire sort of planning process with them. It was kind of the only way I worked. And then by the time they got married, I knew them well. And so I had a great experience with wedding planning. My husband is also self-employed. He travels. We had gotten married, had a baby, and very quickly realized that there was no way I was going to be gone all weekend at a Friday night rehearsal and a Saturday wedding and Sunday come home just exhausted, and have a baby and have a husband who was traveling on his own. So I quit, which was fine, and that was all okay. And then I was home. So again, as you said, my eldest son is 11. He'll be 12, in the spring. So it has been a long time since I'd been in the workforce. My husband is still self-employed and still traveling. And so the thought of any sort of office job, whether it was like a, easy sort of mom-friendly 9 to 2 or 10 to 1, none of that kind of thing was still going to probably work for our family. And having had been an entrepreneur before, I also just selfishly and luckily was able to say, I don't want to go back to an office.
So I want to dig deeper. So let's go back before get more in depth with where you are now. But I want to know more about what got you into wedding planning. What sparked that? What was it like? Was that something you always knew as like in your childhood? Did you just love like? And I've gone to Rachel's house, and she is like she hosts, and she is the hostess of the mostest. Like just everything is always amazing. Were you like that as a kid? Like where did that come from?
Was I like that as a kid? I mean, I guess I have always liked, I'm going to say pretty things. Like I do, yes, but I wasn't like the hopeless romantic kid who just loved weddings. It wasn't necessarily that. Some of it, frankly, was just a business decision. So having worked in nonprofits most of my, pre-entrepreneurial career, I knew very well that nonprofits, when you work there, you wear so many hats. And when you're a consultant for a nonprofit, part of the beauty of that is that people are highly dedicated to what they're doing. And part of the challenge of that is that it would be a weekly meeting, and I'd come in on Tuesday and there would be a plan. And then people, again, would move their hats around and get scrappy and, do all of these things. And by the next Tuesday, the entire thing had shifted. So it was really challenging to make the work replicable. And of course, in the entrepreneurial world, like you need to be able to make things repeat. And so I looked at it and said, well, between my just like of people and planning, and then I had some background in floral design, and so I kind of understood how the wedding industry worked. it just made more sense. It was, okay, I work with someone or a couple for a year and a half, they get married, and then I can, repeat that within reason. I mean, all weddings face challenges of what are you serving for dessert, what's being played, where is the ceremony, all those things. And so it was a little bit more repeatable. And so that it was both of those things. But it really, at the end of the day, was just I had to pay my bills and I had to get smart business wise. And so that was what started it. And at the beginning, I would take any Tom, Dick, and Harry walking through the door, like, sure, I'll do anything, and quickly realize, like, it's not worth it to do anything.
Yeah.
I think um, one of the challenges of being new in business is that you have to be able to say what's actually worth my time and energy, because it's limited, especially as moms. And I wasn't a new mom, but I was, at the time when I started the wedding planning, I was young and I still had limited time.
Important lesson to learn. And I'm still learning it too. I'm just 2 years into my business, and it's like, is this worth, does this align with what we want to do? And is this worth our time and energy? Because if you're saying yes to that, you might be saying no to something that you actually align better with.
For sure. I mean, those are life lessons, right? All of it.
Right. But I think, it's always reassuring yourself that, wherever you are, that you just keep pushing through, and if it feels right, you keep progressing and you keep doing. I think it's those moments of when you're just not enjoying what you're doing every day and you start to kind of think, oh, it just doesn't feel right. It sometimes just isn't, but you've tried and you've put yourself out there. So let's talk about your wedding. So were you wedding planning before your wedding, or you were? Okay. So did that put extra stress on you?
No, one of the things that was really important to me in wedding planning is that I always asked the couples to come up with what your top 3 priorities were, because we think that all weddings are these grandiose, things that end up in magazines and Kardashians, and there were some of those for sure. But and I signed some NDAs, all of that happened. But there also, the vast majority of them were just people who wanted to have a celebration of themselves and their families and friends. So when I got engaged, I had already kind of watched enough of the riffraff to put it down a bit, and we are lucky to both have huge families, and that was important to us. And so that drove in many ways what we decided to do. So we got married here in Colorado because it's a central hub. We got married, at a time when people could take it with a holiday connected on Monday. So, some of that kind of stuff came into play. But no, it was very casual and very Colorado, here in Boulder County. And yeah, but I did know very quickly what I wanted, and more than anything, what I didn't want.
Oh yeah.
So yeah.
Well, okay. What was the most bizarre thing that happened? I always love to know, like, what was the weirdest thing that happened at a wedding, or the thing that caught you off guard the most?
Well, I had a wedding, a client who is a movie star at one point, which on its own was sort of interesting, in that I had gone to the meeting at this little coffee shop in Golden. First time I'm meeting, and I'm sitting there with the bride and I'm talking to her, and she on her own is a model. So I'm looking at her and just like, she's this beautiful woman, right? And I'm paying a lot of attention. Yeah. And then in walks this man, and I kind of like did a double take. Like, again, he's a movie star, but not someone you would instantaneously know. And so I kind of did this double take. And it took me a long time. In fact, it wasn't until after the meeting had ended that I was like, oh, I now know who that is. So fast forward to the wedding day, and the wedding was on this beautiful, like, kind of cliff, and there was a shuttle driver taking guests to and from down to the location, and the shuttle driver's like taking pictures. And I said, I need you to delete those pictures. Yeah. And he was so taken aback. He was like, what? And like, you need to delete the pictures. And then later on, he was like, I had no idea who it was. So it wasn't necessarily weird as much as it was in a whole different realm of like signing NDAs and, protecting these people's privacy. Yeah. But there's always stories, and I will not give any of the good ones away.
You can write a book someday.
Yeah, Rachel, that could be like another whole like
Title of the podcast, Rachel Hagen talks trash about former clients. No, they were lovely. There's inevitably, it's Colorado, so there's inevitably pets involved, which always adds
Yes.
fun. Kids always adds a lot of fun. So
Yeah.
I will say, I don't know, Jenny, I'm assuming you have children.
Yep.
Boys, girls.
I have 2 girls, 18 and 19, or sorry, 22.
She's
and,
finally
and
an empty nester.
Yeah.
She's like,
Okay.
this is her like first experience of empty nesting.
Okay, well, Lori and I can relate to this. I obviously have 2 boys, and I always said that it was the mother of the groom who was the most challenging, because the bride knew what was happening. The bride's mother, presuming that they had a positive relationship, knew what was happening. The groom was supposed to know what was happening, but often didn't. And so then, mom would be like, honey, where are we supposed to be and what time? And he didn't really care. And so she never had enough information. And so she was always sort of the little challenging point. So it's ironic now that I have 2 boys and I maybe someday will be the mother of the groom. Who knows?
I love it.
It's a lesson for us, Lori.
Oh my goodness. So when you left doing wedding planning, was there a moment, or obviously, you had a baby, like what was the, like, I have to be done? Like, was it a hard decision, or was it bittersweet? What emotions were you experiencing?
Yeah, bittersweet's probably a really good way to say it. So my baby was born in the spring. As you could probably imagine, most of the weddings happen in the summer and the fall. And so I had already planned for those. I had a couple assistants at the time, so they ran everything on site up until September. And in September, I was up in Vail at a wedding, and I was nursing. And so my husband was sitting in the lobby, and the couple knew, they met me pregnant. So they knew this was part of the deal. But I would go to the wedding, I'd get the ceremony done and I'd run out to the lobby and nurse. And then I'd go back into the dinner and then come out. It was just like so yo-yoed for me. And I was trying very hard, of course, to make sure that no one else knew that this was going down and going on. So that was like September. And then at that point, I had booked a couple for the next year, and then just slowly said, yeah, in a bittersweet way. I really did love what I did, and I loved the people. But it was just not, conducive to my real life at the time.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a moment. It wasn't necessarily even something that I decided like I was going to sell. One of my assistants went on to form her own company. And so I sort of helped her with that stuff, but it just faded. And it's kind of the beauty of that nature of work, in that, as I said earlier, they would come in, I'd work with them for a year and a half, they'd get married. And then I just got to like become Facebook friends with them and see them have children and go on with their lives, which is still fun to see what has come of all of that.
I think that's what's the hardest. For you, and even for myself, and I think Jenny in her previous positions, like, you had the experiences that you had with these people, but the best was like having the existing relationship that has manifested through meeting them. I have so many dear friends from when I owned my fitness studios that are still part of my life now. And I know Jenny feels the same way, working at different companies. Like, yes, the experience was good, but it's the people, right? That's the most amazing part of it. And for me, that was probably also the hardest part, is because I always had the opportunity to meet all these amazing people all the time. It was like somebody, like, every day I had tons of new people in. And then, when I left, I'm like, I don't get to meet people every day. Yeah. It was kind of hard, right?
So true. And in my case, I was like, head to just one little person who gave me so little back.
Yes.
Right? It's really hard. You give, and I don't want to understate the privilege of being able to make the decision and having made the decision that I made. Like, I had the option, and I'm so grateful, number one, to have had the option, and number two, that I did what I did. But you do go from like having a life to wondering when the last time you showered and put on lip gloss or get makeup. Like, I want chapstick.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
and you go from this like glamorous, there are parts of weddings that are very glamorous and you get to dress up and eat all those kinds of things, to spit up and diapers, right?
Right.
Shift.
And I think there's also something like, I chose this.
Yeah.
This was a life circumstance that changed, but I've chosen this. And so, that can fall two ways, right? On the good days, it falls into like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And on the quote unquote bad days, it's like, and I did this to myself.
Really? Yeah. So what was it like? So your husband, you said he's been self-employed your entire marriage?
My entire marriage. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How is it having two people self-employed?
Well, I mean, for me, it's actually a huge blessing.
Yeah.
I think, so when we were dating and then engaged, we both will say this, like part of why we started our own businesses is we lived in Boulder at the time. And for anyone who's ever been to Boulder, the coffee shops are as busy at 8 a.m. as they are at 1 p.m. And I worked on Pearl Street in a company before I started my business and would walk into a coffee shop and be like, who are these people and why do they get to do this?
I get this gig.
Right? I don't want to sit in a conference room anymore on another meeting. So we spent a lot of time in coffee shops right off Pearl Street, when we were dating, and it was a point, not necessarily a point of connection, but it was just part of our lives. And, our first house, one bedroom was his office and one bedroom was my office. And, so it's just, I guess I don't know any different. I'm really grateful and that I can say that he has always loved what he does.
Mhm.
I think if he was self-employed and it was a burden for him to go to work every day, that would be challenging. But he is an executive coach and does development. So he sees companies, in the starting stages and companies who have been wildly successful and companies who are struggling and people who are in those positions. So he really has a good take on and reminds me often of this is normal or this is part.
Yeah.
This morning we're talking about like the 7-year overnight success, and he said, what gets celebrated in public never gets seen in private, and that you spend 15 years grinding, and then all of a sudden, from your friends and family and Facebook friends' point of view, you look like this, wild success,
right?
Right? Like,
Oh.
but it doesn't work that way. And no one really can say that it works that way because they actually spent a lot of time and energy. So he has a really good grasp on that. And, it's a great thing for our kids. I mean, we sit around the dinner table and the kids are like, well, but mom, like, why do you give them things? I'm like, well, this is not how it works. So then he can chime in and say, when you're a business owner, like you have to be able to make connections so I think it actually is a blessing and has been a real gift to me.
You're showing them what's possible, just like those people at the coffee shop showed you what was possible.
Right. Little did they know as they were sipping their
I know. You never know who you're going to inspire.
So that's a good question. So we all love listening to our husbands, right? When they have good advice, and even sometimes when they have bad. How has it been knowing that's like the industry he's in and you're doing your business? Like, has it been super helpful, or are there times where you're like, I'm not really going to tell. You just kind of want to have a little independence, or do you appreciate the help? There's a good balance, I feel like, right? Like,
yeah. No, I think I've only appreciated the help, at least in this new endeavor. I think it was a little different. What I will say is when I was in wedding planning, part of what I've learned now that I didn't know then is when you're in a service business and you're hungry and you're desperate, you can, evolve yourself and make yourself not be anything, but within reason. Like there were things that I was like, sure, I'll do that. I don't quite know how to, but I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And so I think now that I'm in a product business, I don't think there has been a point where I have felt like, okay, I've got it. Thank you for your advice. I appreciate it. No, I actually need all of it.
Ooh, that's a great question. So what do you feel has been the biggest difference between service and products?
I was going to ask the same thing. Yeah.
That's a very interesting switch. So I'm curious, what has been the biggest challenges that you're facing now that maybe you didn't have to face in the service industry?
Yeah, I think what I said is it. I mean, when you are selling yourself, you can turn on a dime, and anyone who's good and is going to make it has to, right? I mean, you have to, and you have to be able to pivot within the course of a meeting. Products are more challenging, and you can't pivot on a dime. Living through my first holiday season, I'm learning a ton of the things that I'm doing now that I should have been doing in August.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's that. I think you can pivot. And I think you have to be able to. I think in both ways, in both, terms, you have to be able to listen to what your audience is doing. But when you're in a service business, when you are what you're selling, again, you can within reason commit to something and figure it out as you go, or do a little research or piggyback it onto something you do know how to do. And of course there's, within reason on that. You can't just make up a skill you don't have.
Right.
But trying to think of a good example. I don't know if I have one. I just
No,
think
I think that's it. I mean, my husband being an engineer and, kind of
yeah,
being in the product side of things is always like, products are hard.
Yeah.
Like actual tangible things are a lot more complicated than, having a service, right? So I think that, anybody that goes out there to tackle being an entrepreneur in general is amazing. But when you really are like, okay, I'm going to create a product or I'm going to sell a product, it becomes next level of this is harder,
yeah.
right?
Oh,
So let's talk about your company now. What it's called, what it is, and what made you start it. What got the
yeah.
idea in your head?
Well, if my middle name's Pivot, this is certainly part of that. So I started Noted and Company about a year ago. I started kind of the wheels turning, and I hired 5 graphic artists off Fiverr,
Oh,
which
yeah.
if you're not familiar with Fiverr, it's like a place to hire people really from all over the world to do any number of things. There's copywriting, there's book illustrators, there's, all kinds of skills. And so I really just wanted to see, like, how do I get this printed? How does this even work? And my idea was a subscription that came out quarterly for children. So it was born out of I think it was an Instagram post I saw of this woman who her child was a senior. And I think it was like, writing thank yous for something. And he had no idea. He didn't know how to put the stamp on the envelope. He didn't know how to, like, it, and I just thought, like, that might be my kids. I mean, they know how to write a thank you. I've made them write thank yous, but they've never put it in the envelope, done the addressing, all of that stuff. And I think there's a skill to it, there's an art to it, and there's certainly people who envelop and really embody the art side of it, but there's also just, this is real world. And when I was a business owner before, or when I was a hiring manager, at the time, those handwritten notes coming back saying thank you for the interview, thanks for the chat, were actually really important, and they often put someone above and beyond, in terms of, scales of whether you were going to be hired or not. And so I think there's something about written cards and written notes. I don't know about you, but I have some voicemails and some texts, but man, I also have my grandmother's, handwritten recipe cards, and I have cards for my children, and I have the receipt of my husband's wedding ring. The things that are actually tangible for me mean more.
What about the shoebox full of all the letters that you would fold up in middle school and high school and pass? I still think I have some of those where they're just like, hours of learning how to fold it. That was our version of text messaging.
Yeah.
In class, right?
Yeah. I also think, just like we went wild for Kindles, and then we've come back to the value and the fun of having a book, and like getting them from a little library, and the story of where you got the book and where you read it. I mean, I don't know, the book that you read on vacation that you'll never forget, or, whatever it is. I just think it's the same thing. There is something about the tangible. And frankly, I think there's also like the young people who I think are the coolest and doing the coolest things, they are getting back to the tangible, right? Yeah. They're doing embroidery and they're quilting, and all of those things are coming. So
there's like bullet journals, and I've seen people taking up calligraphy, and it's kind of cool. My daughter, she went to summer camp, and the first year that she went, she was 12. And we got this letter from her in the mail, and I have no idea how it made it to us, because it was, I felt like the worst mom ever. I'm like, I didn't teach her how to address an envelope, So, I mean, I think it basically said Mom and Dad Westminster, like literally the bare bones. And somehow it made it to us, and it was written in the wrong spot and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, oh my God, nobody's teaching them this anymore, right? And they don't learn cursive anymore. Like, it's just so different.
Yeah. And I think we want them to know it.
Yeah.
So that's where I started. So I started with a subscription for children. It was 5 cards that came out last spring was the first set. So I kind of did the winter as just a trial, quickly learned that Fiverr has a lot of uses, but it did not work to have 5 different artists. So I found a fellow mom in Maine who is a single mom graphic designer, and she helped me design, or did design, the spring suite. So I launched that in the spring. I did a spring, I did a summer, and then I was sitting outside with my entrepreneurial husband in like August. And I was like, I love the paper. I love the designs. I love the sort of mission, if I can be so bold. I don't know, that feels a bit presumptuous, but the mission. But I'm not a kindergarten teacher. Mm-hmm. And I love my children, but I'm not a kid. This isn't my thing. I'm not going to like jump down, sing songs. And so I pivoted, and I have at this point stopped the subscription, although that is restarting, being announced today, but that's restarting. And I did really holiday gifts. Started again with holiday gifts. So there are 3 box sets of cards. There's 8 cards in each box. And then these little snippets that are about the size of a sticky note, and they're just meant for kind of the quickest and shortest. And
they're my favorite. When I online, I love those. I'm like, oh my gosh, and they're such a great gift. The first thing I noticed, in fact, and the artwork is beautiful, but the first thing I noticed is the weight of the card.
Yeah, it's really nice. It stands out, right? Yeah. Like that. I noticed that also. Like, you go to the store and you buy cards, and you're like, it's fine, but like it's the difference between like,
it's like luxury.
Yeah, it exactly is. Like, and I mean, you think about it, like that now is the time of Christmas cards, right? Like everybody's sending out Christmas cards, and it really does make a difference when you get a Christmas card that somebody just, it probably costs them more money, but it just feels more like special holding in their hands. And when I hold your cards in my hands the same way, I feel like it's next level. It's like, wow, this is really like meaningful, right? Not just the words, but the way it feels. I mean, it's kind of like an Apple product, if you think about it, right? It's the experience, the packaging.
I just had an idea for you. If you haven't thought of it yet, you've got wedding experience. You could dovetail this into, like, even if you did snippets, they could be wedding, like, here's where you capture all of the little notes from your wedding party. Here's what you hand out to all the guests, and they give you advice. You can do invitations.
That list of contacts, Rachel. Like, there you go.
It's the opportunities are endless. Yeah, trust me. Yeah. Well, thank you. The paper's not by chance. I've found myself, the number of times people have said to me like, oh, I have all these letters from my grandmother and I really wish I wrote letters. Or I used to write letters, but they just always had to be perfect. And I didn't want to send them if they weren't perfect. And I don't have time for that. And all of that has kind of brought me to a couple of like mantras, sort of. And one of them is that what hopefully our products do is show that the words are important, but they're not precious. Like, it's not 5 pages of letters. It doesn't have to be, crossing out a word is just fine, and rewriting an I is just fine. So being important, but not precious, and so precious that we're paralyzed to not do it.
Yeah, right.
And then also that a sentence is a note, and one sentence can mean plenty, right? I love you. I miss you. I'm thinking of you. Here's a coffee. You've got this. Whatever it is just a short message is still a message, and it's still important. In fact, it might be all you need to say. So all of that, the paper is intentional. And advice to the couple could be intentional. That's, the snippets could be. The snippets have been really fun.
Yeah. I love those.
And I think you're so new. I mean, being really just a year in your business, you're still figuring out like, what is your core product? Like, like snippets, or where, not that you don't always offer all of them, but where do you spend more of your valuable time? What are consumers really kind of gravitating towards? So it's interesting, right? To kind of be in that discovery phase that I think every business goes through, right? It doesn't matter service, product, whatever. You're trying to figure out what, with me, with my fitness studios, it was like, okay, I had X amount of classes that I thought when I first started, people want to go to this class because I like it. And I'm like, no, they don't really like that. They like this, right? So you're always evolving and changing. So what you thought when you first started, like, oh, I'm going to focus on kids. And then you're like, oh, well, maybe, you just start to kind of realize maybe not only internally what your passion is, but also what feedback you're getting from people, right? Parents could have been, wow, I really love these, I really love these cards. I wish that there was a little bit more that I could utilize them for. And so I think it's all very interesting, the development of any business.
It's an important thing too. I think, tend to think that what people are going to love is what you also love. And that can be really hard, right? It's like, oh, guess what? I love this, but it's not the most popular thing, or people don't want it at all. And it's just a weird feeling, right? And you have to wrap your brain around it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, interestingly, the snippets, I wasn't going to do any holiday themed snippets at all.
Yeah.
And this close friend of mine said, I need some because every Christmas Eve I host a dinner for myself, my sister, and all of our, immediate family members. And I write little love letters to all of them at their place settings. And it's a tradition. Everyone looks forward to it. And so can you make me some kind of wintry ones? And I was like, sure.
Yeah.
And so sure enough, I make them and they've sold out. Like I finally got another shipment yesterday. But to that point, like I was thinking, I'm not going to try and get in all of the scuttlebutt of the holidays because there's plenty of holiday cards out there. And here it is that actually this is really, really popular. And I love them. They're my favorites right now.
They're unique and they're different, right? It's something that stands out amongst the normal, right? I think it's just that uniqueness and that just small and special. And honestly, I feel like people might actually hold on to something like that longer just because it's easier to put in a drawer or a store or hold on to. And the wording may be less, so even more impactful potentially. So
how did you find this woman in Maine? I'm curious. I love that you were like, you know what? No, I'm going to find somebody who is also a mom and also wants to do some work contributing to something beyond her family. Like, how did you find her and how has that been?
Wow. There's a website. I think it's called Hire My Mom or My Mom for Hire. Literally. Literally hire my mom. I think that's what it's called, something like that. But to that point, there was a woman. I mean, it's funny now. At the time, I was beside myself. I hired an initial person, and I got back from her. I can't even say that it was clip art. Like I actually don't know what it was. So I had to, cut ties. Yeah. So to that point, you have to kind of wade through a little bit, but. She is both a fine artist and a graphic designer. So she's able, and often she often starts with, so I'm working on something that's coming out in January and it will be a subscription and it'll be 4 cards. Every season you'll get 4 cards and they're the same size as the holiday cards that have been for sale. So the holiday cards come in this gift box. And then as you deplete that box, you will always have a restock coming. And when I say seasonal, they're not like, I don't know, what do I want to say? Like, it's not a snowman. It's not an Easter bunny, right? But one of the designs is inspired by a retaining wall that's been painted on here in Louisville. And so there's this wall and I've driven by it so many times and I love it. And so I'm like taking pictures of it and sending it to her. And then she takes that and has done pencil drawings for me of the start of it. And then she'll put it on the computer. So she has this ability and the capabilities to really take my very mediocre crayon drawings or pictures and make them into something. So it's just been it's a great fit. And I'm lucky. I have a couple of designers, but she is the primary. Yeah. So yeah. Hire my mom for hire. I don't know.
I like that. And it's funny. We've had conversations because we've needed. I have an HR business, and we've needed some help in certain areas. And it's like we've had people say, "Oh, a virtual assistant, you can get somebody overseas," and it's like we feel, and not that there's anything wrong with that, and those people need to make a living too. But we kind of felt like we would love to employ people that are like us, that are just trying to like work freelance, work on their own terms, and support their family, you know? So yeah, we've had that kind of that feeling of like, no, we want to give back to a woman that's like in our shoes or has the shoes we've been in.
I think it makes the business that much more powerful too.
Yeah.
So the story, right? Getting the story out there too is so compelling to all entrepreneurs and the consumers that end up buying, their service or product. Yeah, they're drawn to it initially because they need cards or they need fitness services or they need HR services. But ultimately, it's what really connects them. Like, I think you're going to hit home a lot harder with those moms when they're like, oh, well, you're a mom and you started this company. Oh my gosh. And the lady that does your art, she's a mom and then it's like, oh my gosh. And then they're telling everyone else.
You want to support your fellow,
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, people are like, well, it costs more to do that. I'm like, yeah, it does. But there's a reason we want to do it, right? It's part of our mission. It's part of how we want to show up in the world. So it was an interesting conversation when we were talking about it.
And I think there's also a balance of, you're also a business and you need to be profitable. So it can be challenging to find that fine line of, hiring this local mom or hiring this local person is more expensive. And how can you, reduce costs elsewhere? Or how can you reduce the time and make it more efficient? I don't know, but the story is important. I mean, I think there's a reason we all know, Tom's shoes, or we all know Bombas socks. I mean, the story is important, and they sell in part on that story, and they have mastered that. Like, someone else who wants to make hand knit socks can't say they're Bombas and that they're also giving to, to shelters. They can do that, but that's not their story. So I think, and the story's still evolving. I think that's the other piece, is like anyone who's in their own business, if your story's not evolving, then, then you're done, or
totally.
you're going to fall flat.
Yeah.
So up until this point in your life, I always love to ask this question. What are you most proud of?
I think the sacrifice that is motherhood, and the sacrifice of staying home and sort of taking your life and evolving it. I'm not going to say put it aside, because I still had a life that was fun. But I think that part of, when I look at like my mother, who had me at 24, 25, it was very different than me having children in my 30s, where I had already had a full life. I mean, I had lived, I had traveled, and I had owned a business, and I had worked multiple jobs, and I'd lived in multiple cities, and like, I had a life. So it's not, I don't want to say that it was harder for me to stay home than my mother or than that generation, or make any qualifications on what anyone else has chosen. But I do think that it's not something that we necessarily give credit to primarily women, certainly men too, but it's not just that you give up wearing nice clothes and you have spit and things all over you, like, that all you do is deal with baby things. But I think there is something that I would say that was a big decision, and I was fine saying I was at home with kids, and I was a stay-at-home mom. And so I guess I'd say that maybe that being able to make that decision and put my life to the side for a minute, or put some aspects of my life to the side for a minute. A long minute.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's something you should be proud of, right? I feel like every decision we make, sometimes we're like, ooh, but I think in hindsight, it's like, it makes you proud because it puts you to where you are in this current moment. And moms, we should all be really fucking proud, because, we take care of ourselves, we take care of our kids, we take care of our husbands, we take care of our animals, we take care of it all. So
yeah.
So what are you looking forward to? That's always something I like to kind of put out there too, because I feel like it's refreshing. It could be with your business, with your personal life, with kids. What do you have on tap?
Well, I'm loving what I'm doing. I am very excited. As I said, relaunching the subscription in January. There's Valentine's Day plans. I'm excited about all of that. I'm dropping off my first wholesale order to a retail shop this morning. Like, all of that is really fun. And part of, part of it is I'm in this, I'm not doing everything by any means, but I do feel like I'm as expansive, and I'll do retail, I'll do this, I'll try that, I'll do this, I'll do this. And I may kind of hone back in. And so I'm kind of excited to see what the new evolution, not new, but the continued evolution is. I'm looking forward to the holidays. Maybe I should start shopping.
Right. Still have like 2 weeks.
Always looking forward to, time with my kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
But I think you saying right there, like that's what is so exciting. Well, for me, like about being an entrepreneur, like, is it's just not having this like box that you have to be in. It's being like, oh, well, that didn't work. Like pivoting, right?
Yeah.
Our favorite word today. Like being able to kind of like, oh, I'm going to try retail. Yeah, maybe that's not like, maybe that's it. Maybe that's everything. But it doesn't have to be. And if it doesn't, like, you don't feel like
You're not stuck.
like corporate America, I feel like it's like, this is what you do. And, yes, there's a little bit of, wiggle room, but it's like, you can do whatever you want. And it's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, you're the boss. You get to pick.
You're the boss.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And you're the boss, and it all comes back to you, right?
Yeah.
So, the beauty of corporate America, or having a 9 to 5, even if it's not corporate America, is that you have something to guarantee. And in entrepreneurship, you don't have it. So, there are times certainly where that would be really nice, but it's not my game, but I think there's value to that. So it's fun.
Okay, before we end today, I want everybody, please tell your website, how they can follow you, how they can see you, how they can write with you. Tell them that you do that.
Yes. So website is notedandcompany.com. I'm on Instagram at notedandcompany.com. Okay. Every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, I have something called Write With Me Wednesday. So I go live for maybe 8-10 minutes, and I talk a little bit, and then you are instructed or invited to bring a pen and card with you and some idea of who you'd like to write to, and then we just write together. So it's just silent for a minute, 2, while we each write a sentence. My hope is, or my thought is that even if you're not able to get on there at Wednesdays at 10, because of course everyone has a life, that at least when you see it come through your Instagram feed, and maybe watch it, maybe you don't even watch it, you just say, oh, I want just quick, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. It does not take long to simply say, thanks so much for what you've done. Thanks for the bag of apples from your tree. Whatever it is, just that super quick message. So that's my hope, is that it's just a quick kind of reminder for people. Yeah. Write With Me Wednesday morning.
Love it. Thank you so much, Rachel. It has been a pleasure to have you on the show. I look forward to spending one of my Wednesday mornings with you and writing, because believe it or not, I used to be such a writer. I got a degree in journalism, all the things, and I was very passionate. Still had this like desire in the back of my head at some point, I'm going to write a book. But it's funny because, as Rachel knows, I don't read all that much. I should probably read more, but I've always been a big fan of writing.
It's timing.
It is. It's perfect.
Timing, right? I turned middle-aged this year, and I was like, it's only middle age, right? We're only in the middle of our lives. We're not the end. There's still time.
Yeah, at the beginning of the next steps of amazingness.
That's right.
That's
right.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you both. My pleasure. It was so fun.